Hey, what's up everybody? This is C.L.S. all-in-one. In today's video, I will show you how to change the front struts in a 2013 through 2019 Ford Explorer. Generally, struts and shocks usually wear out within 50,000 to 100,000 miles. This Explorer made it to around 105,000 miles before the struts started to fail and began making noise with every large bump I drove across. For replacement struts, I decided to go with a pair of already struts which are very affordable, but the quality of these particular struts is not very good, and unfortunately they produce a pretty rough ride, so I would recommend just spending some extra money on a pair of quality brand name struts. So I will start with the driver's side first. When working without a lift, I prefer to jack up just one side at a time, and right here is a solid lifting point. Once the tire is lifted in the air just a couple of inches, I then place a jack stand underneath the vehicle in a solid place. Then lower the vehicle onto the stand, then raise the jack back up slightly to where it just barely makes contact, and this will provide 2 points of support. Now I can remove the lug nuts, which are 19 millimeters in size. Then remove the wheel and place it out of the work area. So here is a look at the strut. It has 2 bolts that secure it at the bottom, 1 nut that secures it to the sway bar link, and 4 nuts that secure it at the top. If there is any corrosion or rust buildup on any of these bolts or nuts, it would be a good idea to spray all these locations with a rust penetrating spray first, before attempting to remove the strut. Now it's time to remove 3 out of the 4 nuts on the top of the strut underneath the hood. For this you will need a 15 millimeters mid-length socket, but a deep well socket will work as well. It's just kind of a tight fit. With the 4th nut you can go ahead and loosen it, but make sure to leave it on by at least a couple threads for now. So this 1 nut just keeps the strut from falling after removing all the lower bolts. Now, located at the bottom of the strut, you will find a sensor wire that is clipped to the side of the strut. This clip will more than likely be brittle and might break upon removal, but can be replaced with a new clip fairly easy. Then, after removing the clip, the sensor wire can then be removed from the holding bracket on the strut. Next, it is time to remove the nut on the sway bar link, which is 21 millimeters, and a 10 millimeters socket and ratchet will be needed as well, which fits on the tip of the bolt and holds it in place to keep the bolt from spinning. So right here, I am using a 21 millimeters end wrench to loosen the nut, and a 10 millimeters socket and ratchet to hold the bolt in place. And after removing the nut, for now, I will just leave the sway bar link in place, because it will remove much easier once the bottom bolts are removed. And before you remove the bottom bolts, I would recommend to add some support underneath the rotor, which will help keep the CV axle from possibly dislocating after the strut is removed. But if the axle does dislocate, it can be set back in place fairly easy, and I will demonstrate this as well. So the bolt heads on the bottom of the strut are 21 millimeter and the nuts are 24 millimeter. But to remove mine, I will just be using an adjustable crescent wrench and a 15/16 socket along with an impact drill, because my 24 millimeter impact socket is missing, and a 15/16 impact socket still fits fairly well. With that being said, a 24 millimeter socket or wrench would still be the best tool for this job. Once the nuts are removed, you can use a hammer or mallet to remove the bolts, and you can also loosen the bolt at the same time, which usually works really well. And for the bolts that are really tight or rusted in place, I would recommend to thread the nut back onto the end of the bolt before striking it hard with the hammer, which will protect the bolt from damage. Once the bolts are removed, you can start pulling and wiggling the rotor until it breaks free. But be careful not to pull any farther than is needed so you can avoid dislocating the CV axle, and a pry bar may be necessary to separate the strut during this step. After separating the bottom of the strut, the sway bar link should now remove with ease. Now, I just need to remove the last nut on the top of the strut. During this step you will want to make sure the strut is supported, because it will fall once the nut is removed. So if you are not able to hold the strut while removing the nut, a strap or a second person may be needed. After removing the strut from the vehicle, you will want to compare the old strut with the new one to ensure it is the same. The new struts should be labeled to indicate the proper location. This one has an FL sticker, which indicates it is for the front left side. These struts also had a warning sticker on the top, which mentions to not remove the larger nut that is located under this sticker, because there is an enormous amount of tension involved with the compression of the spring that can cause serious injury if not handled properly. So the only thing I will remove on these struts is just the 4 smaller nuts, which are used to secure the top of the strut to the vehicle. Now, it is time to mount the new strut on the vehicle, which will mount the same exact way the old strut was. The 4 bolts on the top of the strut line up with the 4 holes inside the engine compartment. After placing the strut in position, I secure it with just 1 nut, but leave it loose, which will allow the strut to have a little movement, so the bottom connections will be easier to attach. Now, I can attach the sway bar link to the strut, then hand tighten the nut. Then I will use a 21mm wrench to tighten the nut, while holding the bolt in place with a 10mm socket and ratchet until the nut is somewhat tight, and this nut will need to be torqued to 111 pounds, but I will wait to do this until the strut is fully secured. Now, I will go ahead and attach the strut at the bottom, and it will have a little bit of tension because of the sway bar link, so it will take a little bit of force to place it in position. Once the strut is lined up, I then push the hub assembly towards the strut until it lines up with the bolt holes, and this should push into position fairly easy. But if the CV axle has become dislocated, it will take a little bit of force. With mine, all I had to do was wiggle the hub assembly, while at the same time pushing it towards the strut, and it eventually popped right into position with the bolt holes. And once I get at least 1 hole lined up fully, I then insert the bolt. And for the second bolt, you may have to move the hub around to make it line up correctly with the bolt hole. Now I can go ahead and thread the 2 24mm nuts in place, then tighten them, and these bolts will actually hold in position rather well. But if you do need a wrench, the bolt head size is 21mm. After tightening the nuts, I then use a torque wrench to torque the nuts to 180 pounds. Then I also torque the nut on the sway bar link as well, with 111 pounds of torque. Now I can go ahead and secure the sensor line to the strut on this small mount. And there is also a clip that secures this line to the side of the strut, but I decided to just not worry about it, because the sensor line seems to be holding in place good, just the way it is. Next, I can add the 3 remaining nuts to the top of the strut inside the engine compartment, then tighten them with a 15mm socket and ratchet, then torque the nuts to 41 pounds. Here is a quick look at the strut after the installation, and now all that is left on this side is to put the wheel back on. When mounting the wheel, it's always best to hand thread the lug nuts first by at least a few threads, which will help ensure you don't cross the threads when using tools such as an impact drill. When tightening the lug nuts, you should use a crisscross or star pattern to ensure the wheel is drawn down evenly. Then after securing the wheel, I then remove the jack stands and lower the vehicle. And now I will use my torque wrench on the lug nuts and apply 100 pounds of torque. So this side is now completely done, and it's time to start on the other side. The directions for the passenger side are pretty much exactly the same, and I will leave you with a time lapse of the install on this side. If you liked this video, if you could hit that like button and please subscribe. And have yourself a great day, and I'll see you next time.